All right, I am going to start off a presentation on the Coast Fork Watershed and let's see if I can share that presentation.
By the way, there are the links up to those articles on land acknowledgements in our chat. So all you have to do is go and you can highlight them, copy them, and you can save them on another document, or at the very end of the, I think there's 3 dots you can also just hit right below and you can copy that way.
Okay, now I am ready, hopefully, to bring up this presentation. Sorry for the delay. All right, let's see if we can. So are folks able to see this now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I am going to talk about the Coast Fork Willamette Watershed. It is the southernmost low elevation watershed in the Willamette Valley. It is, I'm not sure if you see my cursor, but it is bounded by Spencer Butte and Mount Pisgah in the north, at the northern end of the drainage basin, the Coast Range on the west, and the low elevation Cascades on the east. And there's what's called the Kalapuya Divide to the south that separates the Willamette and Umpqua rivers. The watershed is primarily in Lane County, but it also has a small part in Douglas County. And it is 667 square miles, which is about 6% of the 11,000 square mile Willamette River watershed. Geographically speaking, the really important thing is if you look right here to the left of Cottage Grove on the Silk Creek, that's where I am right now. So, and
Awesome.
And so there's 2 main reservoirs in the watershed. There's the Dorinia Reservoir and Cottage Grove Reservoir. The Dorinia Reservoir, that's the damming of the Row River, and that is sourced from the Row River. So it's spelled R-O-W. So if you want to look like a person who doesn't know the area at all, if you pronounce it Row, we send you home. So it's the Row River. And that is fed from Laying Creek and Sharps Creek, and I'll show those in more detail. And then the Coast Fork Willamette River is dammed to form the Cottage Grove Reservoir south of the town, and then there's also Mosby Creek, which flows into the Row and is an undammed free-flowing tributary. So the highest part of the watershed is way down here, the southern part of Lane County or near Douglas, in the Fairview Peak at 5,900 feet. The typical Willamette River floodplain is around 450, and the average elevation is about 1,400. So this is there's multiple different sort of sources of the Coast Fork Willamette River. One of those is really the source that goes up through the Cottage Grove Reservoir, and we'll show that in a little bit. It comes primarily from the joining of the Big River and the Little River. The Little River is also named or called Garut Creek, and it's also sometimes pronounced as or spelled Sarut Creek. And those both come together here and flow into Cottage Grove and then further north. And here's a picture sort of showing what we call the Kalapuya Divide. Kalapuya is often spelled a whole bunch of different ways, but it's this ridge down at the southern part of the watershed, and all the water that's north of that ridge flows into the Coast Fork watershed in these multiple different paths, and then south of that is into the Umpqua. So here's just some common terms. Since this is like our fourth or fifth, these are probably pretty familiar, but the headwaters is really where we think of as the beginning or the upper part of a stream, the source. Upriver, again, is towards the source or against the current upstream. Downriver is downstream, away from the source, flowing in this way towards the Pacific. And here's a picture of the upper Coast Fork. And so when we say upper Coast Fork, that's again towards the southern part of our watershed. And let's see where we are. Before we continue, this is a good time where we're going to stop a little bit. It's going to go away and hopefully come back. And then I'm going to share a different screen and hopefully give you a flying tour of the watershed if I can find Chrome. Perhaps I should have fewer windows. Okay. Okay, so we are going to use this exciting tool. It's called River Runner. And are you seeing the River Runner yet? Can people hear me or see this?
Yep, yep.
Okay,
Yeah, we
cool.
can see it.
Great. And so basically, this is a very cool web-based tool. David's the one that found it and introduced it to us. And it lets us pick a point anywhere in the country. And then it will, it'll pretend as if a drop of water was hit on that area. And how would that water flow towards its ultimate destination? And so I picked here, I think I picked Little River, and it's showing up as Garut Creek. And so we're going to follow that water all the way through the Cottage Grove Reservoir. So this is Black Butte, which is the very big upriver. It's coming up through London Springs. It goes a little fast for me, but this is the Cottage Grove Lake. And coming in through town, we've now become the Coast Fork River, going through Cresswell now, sort of up along I-5, and then we'll head sort of to the east and we'll cross Highway 58 right up here, and then we'll end up getting close to Mount Pisgah. We've probably passed that, and join up with the Middle Fork, and now the Mackenzie, and then you sort of seen where this story ends. So kind of cool. And then we're going to switch to another window. Now here we are. This is really going to be close to Lang Creek. The only thing I could get this tool to find was Pinard Butte, but it's actually going to be close to Lang Creek. So this is closer to the Dorena side. So this is going to come up through Lang Creek, which is going to flow into the Row River. I think we're probably the Row River now, and then we're going to come up through Dorena Lake, and then curve a little bit left, meet up with, then we'll end up meeting up with the Coast Fork Willamette, which we have done now. Looking like coming through Cottage Grove. Oh, maybe that was Cresswell, sorry, it goes really fast. Mount Pisgah, now we're back up meeting the Middle Fork and on and on. Pretty cool tool. And now I'll go back to the presentation if we can find it again.
Is there a way to slow down that link?
No, I mean that it actually has a little slider. The slider at the bottom is lets you choose the level of detail and the speed, and I have it as slow as you can make it. Maybe I need a slower computer, but it's way too fast for me.
It's a very cool tool.
It's a very cool tool, but way too fast.
Way too fast.
Okay, so here we are at again, this is the Coast Fork River, just south of Cottage Grove Lake. Again, this is looking upriver again, it's probably south of Cottage Grove Lake. Here's the lake and dam. Now here, this is sort of just north of Cottage Grove Lake, and where it's gonna start flowing towards the city. So that was all on this line here, coming up through the Coast Fork Willamette River into the Cottage Grove Lake, and then continuing to flow towards town, where ultimately is going to meet up with the Row River, or the Row River is going to meet up with it. So this is the other major sources for the Coast Fork. So we have the Row River to the east, which is primarily sourced by Lane Creek and Bryce Creek, and it looks like a typo, but it's actually spelled Layng. This map here has an I, but probably because autocorrect, but it's typically shown without an I. So Bryce Creek and Lane Creek join together to form the Row, and then they continue up towards Dorena. And then the other major tributary that comes in is Sharps Creek, which flows in with the Row River to Dorena. And then there is one other main source, which is Mosby Creek, which is not dammed, so that's free flowing. And we have a number of our friends and supporters who live out Mosby Creek, and that comes right in, meets up here before it comes into town. Some pictures of that. This is the confluence of the Mosby Creek and the Row River. So the Row River is here coming from Dorena. Mosby Creek is coming from the south and meeting up here. And I think that's before it joins the Coast Fork Willamette River. And then here is a picture of Lane Creek, and it's above where they join with Bryce Creek to form the Row. Oh, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but all of these beautiful photos are thanks to David, our CRLC photographer. Made my presentation a lot easier, but there's just some wonderful photos here. Here is I guess this is again where Lane Creek and Bryce Creek come together. So it's Bryce Creek on the right and Lane Creek on the left in the beginning of the Row River. And here is where the Row River and Sharps Creek come together. It's always amazing to me to see the places where the rivers join. And this is the Row River near Sharps Creek, I'm assuming downriver. This is once we get to Dorena Reservoir, not as high as we'd like. Same here. Now this is actually just in Cottage Grove, a little north of town. This is where the Coast Fork Willamette River is near the Cottage Grove racetrack, and racetrack isn't far from here. And this is some friends of ours have a property there with lots of acreage right on the river. And then after it leaves the town of Cottage Grove, the Coast Fork Willamette River continues up towards where it meets with the Middle Fork, and it has two main creeks contribute flow. Hill Creek, and Hill Creek seems to come in a number of little places, and then Bear Creek, and they join and go up towards Mount Pisgah and then to the Middle Fork. And we've got some pictures of that. This is I think this is probably closer to Cottage Grove, where the Row River comes into the Coast Fork. And then this is a bridge near Cresswell, another version from that bridge. And another. And so here is just a photo of what it looks like, how the Coast Fork and the Middle Fork join together. So I think we'll have some pictures of Coast Fork coming near Mount Pisgah, and then it sort of curves back west, and right around where we see Doris Ranch, this is all the Middle Fork that's coming in from the east, and so they join up here, and I think that would become the Willamette there. And so before you get to Mount Pisgah, the river crosses Highway 58. And here's a couple of pictures of it at that bridge. And then now we're we're right where the Coast Fork and the Middle Fork join together. And that's it for the photos, and that's largely the the flow of the river towards the Willamette. And what else can we tell you? In terms of the topography was very different prior to European settlement. It was a lot more because the dams are more of a recent thing. There was habitual flooding. I actually had some pictures that I didn't include of Cottage Grove used to flood regularly. They used to call it Slab Town because there would be slabs of wood so that people could walk through town because it was so flooded. There was, floodplains, wetlands covering much of the lower Willamette Valley. There was mosaics of oak woodlands, open savanna, and prairie grasslands, flanked by streams and perched wetlands, conifer forests, and they gave way to different trees in the higher elevations, alpine conifers, and so forth. The indigenous people managed the land differently than we do now. Obviously, they used fire to maintain the savanna. There was a key food source was camas, and that would grow in that type of landscape. And so they would use fire and flooding to maintain that. With the loss of the indigenous cultures, the landscapes changed, fire suppression, flood control, and that's reduced the habitat diversity. And here's some good source of that. Pretty interesting is that oak woodlands have been reduced by 80%, and then the wetlands have been reduced by 87%, or quite a bit. And hardwoods have all largely disappeared too. That's about the habitat. What are some of the ecological threats going on here? These are probably many of these are similar to things that David talked about earlier. Some of them are caused by logging and development. So there's increased sedimentation in the streams and rivers, and that harms fish and other aquatic life. And sedimentation is also, a byproduct of erosion. So when you either chop down all the trees or, kill off a lot of the vegetation that is holding down the soils, and those soils will run off into the rivers and streams, reduces the water quality in the streams, causes turbidity. Then you've got both agricultural activities such as intensive grazing, and then the use of pesticides and fertilizers, and they contribute to water pollution and harm fish. Not just agricultural activity, but the industrial forestry does that as well, because herbicides are a fundamental part of that harmful style of resource extraction. So when they spray, then the rains come, all those herbicides, pesticides flow into the rivers and contribute to a decline in watershed health. We're also seeing, because of the intensity of the timber operations, the harvesting, and in shorter and shorter cycles, we have dramatically reduced the fertility of the soil to produce the trees, and the timber companies are now dropping fertilizer in order to try to maintain the productivity of the industrial forest. When they do that, those fertilizers go into the rivers and streams and ultimately lakes, causing algae blooms and other problems. Urbanization has impacts as well, so that could be more stormwater runoff, which can carry all kinds of things into the streams and river. And then climate change is also a factor. We're more likely to have more frequent and more severe droughts, as well as more intense storms. And so when we have these greater, more intense storms, that can mean a lot more water flows through the rivers all at once, and that can pull in more sedimentation, more pollution, and more damage. And what has happened? And let's see if I can, here are some more slides and they've gone away. Oh, here they are. Here's a slide. David introduced me to this pretty cool, I think it's called OnX Hunt, and it's actually a tool for hunters, which I'm not. But I think they often have an interest in knowing who owns what land so they can know whether they can access it or not. Turns out to be pretty handy for finding out who owns different parcels of land. And I was playing with this quite a bit last night, and I looked at a lot of different areas, but one of them is, I believe this is right near Cottage Grove Lake. And I just clicked on you see a lot of BLM lands or Oregon lands, but then I clicked on some of the ones that weren't Oregon lands, and they're kind of highlighted and bounded by this sort of lightish green. And this is all Weyerhaeuser land. You can see where it's all been.
Well, actually, we can't see anything because you're not sharing your screen.
Well, hell. Okay, well, back to that. Let's try again. I don't
Thanks,
know.
Michelle.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know what. When I was sharing the screen before, it didn't want to do that. Hold shift. Tell me if you're seeing anything again. All right. How about
Yeah.
that? Okay. So here's this tool. And I put it into presentation mode, so hopefully you're seeing it still.
Yes.
Good, thank you. So you'll see this area bounded by light green. I just clicked one of those, I'm not sure, one of those plots. And they're all together owned by the same owner, which is Weyerhaeuser Company. And you can see the areas that are denuded where they've been clear cut, and other areas that were clear cut relatively recently, and some areas that are still unlogged. But this is a huge amount of land just north of Cottage Grove Lake. I didn't want to be using the tool a lot while we're talking about it, just hard to follow. But if I were to go to the south of Cottage Grove Lake or the east of Cottage Grove Lake and pick on some of the quadrants around there, you get the very same effect. You'd see a lot of Weyerhaeuser owning a lot of land that's being clear cut, not very far from our primary drinking water source. Here's another view. I think this one is, this might be, this is actually to the east of Cottage Grove Lake. And then, oops, I had another one with Dorina as well. So it all looks fairly similar, which is Weyerhaeuser and sometimes other companies, but a lot of Weyerhaeuser around here owning a ton of the land and cutting it pretty heavily, not far from our water sources. Here's a photo of.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about how they love to use the word manage when they're talking about lands. They're not clear cutting, they're managing forests. Or yeah.
Well, manage somehow connotes that something good is going to happen, but not really. So here's a clear cut in the north side of the Row River, and another clear cut, and then actually more clear cuts. Weyerhaeuser has a big, I think this is a tree farm north of Dorina, and then here's a huge lumber yard in the south part of town. So Weyerhaeuser is pretty active here, and I think when we talk about the threats to the watershed in terms of sedimentation and pesticide use, I think we can, Weyerhaeuser is a big part of that. And that is it for my overview of the Coast Fork Watershed.
Anybody have questions for Rob or comments to make? Thanks, Rob. That was very informative.
You are welcome.
Hi, this is Steve Deere.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, thank you. That was excellent. And I think the answer is no to my question, but I'm curious, in terms of the threats, that was really well done. Okay, here's my question. Is there any list, even a sort of incomplete list, that anybody keeps of specific threats? Like I would add to each watershed, for example, name a list that names the companies like Weyerhaeuser in this watershed. Just a list of all the known threats. That could be hundreds, but that would be very interesting and useful to organize around. Just curious if anybody's ever heard of such a thing.
No, I have not heard of such a thing. I don't know that it exists. One thing that was not going at it from the direction that you're saying, but which was sort of getting some of the same information, Marshall Gauss, who I think many of you know passed away, was doing a lot of work with the aerial spray notification system. And so it's basically by looking at all the sprays that were happening in Lane County, which is kind of what he was doing, was trying to look at all the notifications. You then see all of the actors who are basically spraying in a watershed, and if they're spraying, they're clear cutting. So that kind of gives you some of that information, but it's not. You kind of have to look at it by a certain geography, like map out an area and figure out what's going on in it, as opposed to having it be centered around the watershed. It's a good idea.
Thanks.
Yes, Savannah.
Is there a protocol or a way of managing forests to protect the watershed and to prevent forest fires? Are there suggested ways of going about doing that so that these companies probably making less money doing it that way, but that at least there's a suggestion as this is how you can continue and protect the forest and the watershed and the forest fire issue?
There definitely are. I don't know if David and Dee, if either you want to take a crack at that or want me to.
Sure. One of the things they can do that would help a lot is do way longer rotations. One of the issues is there have been multiple studies showing that tree plantations are the most flammable of all. And like the Holiday Farm fire up to McKenzie, the vast majority of the acreage was tree farm, largely Weyerhaeuser and other timber companies, but hugely Weyerhaeuser land. And by having way longer rotations and having more complex forests rather than plantations, where they're all the same tree species and same age and all that would definitely help. If we brought beaver back into the landscape, there, besides the Kalapuya really using fire as a tool, there was way less spreading of fire in a lot of areas because there was so much more water in the landscape, and we've drained and lessened water in a lot of the landscape, so fires can just go on and on way further. Just a few ideas with.
Yeah, those are great, David. Thank you. There's some papers that we had circulated a while ago, probably a few years ago, but that have some examples of some sustainable forestry. I mean, one way would also be doing more selective harvest rather than clear cutting. So if you're just taking out some of the trees, then you're not clear cutting, then you're not needing to spray. And if you're not spraying, you're not going to have that runoff either. So I think there was one of those studies showed that you could get the equivalent amount of board feet of lumber of material out of a forest managed sustainably, but it would just be over a much longer period of time. Whereas Wall Street forestry, you want to make all your money right away by cutting it as fast as you can. So I think it's the profit motive that's getting us, not the, that's dictating an unsustainable model.
I'd like to jump in here and say that the Siuslaw National Forest is an excellent example of forestry management that is more geared toward protecting the environment and also make money. So they have a website, you can go check out stats.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron.
How do they do that, Aaron? Are they, because they're still clear cutting in the Siuslaw.
In the national forest,
Oh, you're talking about the national.
the Siuslaw National Forest, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing the Siuslaw was thinning and doing logging in their second growth forests that had already been logged before, and they were logged long enough ago that they had grown back, but they're running out of those now. And if they're producing the same volume of timber, now older forests are being targeted. And so there's a threat in the Siuslaw also.
Rob,
Yeah, Richard.
you must have spent plenty of time looking at that, like that last sectional map. There seemed to be very little dark green. That's actual forest, right? And
Yeah.
that's, what percentage would you give estimate of the entire quadrant, which,
It's a great question, Richie. I don't know. I was really more, I could spend more time on it. It really is interesting, but I was more trying to figure out who were the actors and who owned it. But then how much is sort of remaining in a older forest state? Good question, but I don't know the answer.
it looked like offhand, it looked like roughly half or less is actually forested.
Yeah, if I were going to guess, I'd probably say about that. Barb, you got a question?
Yeah, I have a request of David, actually. When we did a tour last fall of the Valley of the Giants, David told an amazing story of when he and Dee were out in the wilderness and had to cut down one particular tree to clear the path. And the story was just amazing about how much water came out of that tree. Do you mind telling that story, David?
Oh, sure. This was right outside the wilderness of the Middle Sandy Am wilderness. And it was a down tree. It wasn't a standing tree, but it was probably 4.5, 5 feet in diameter, and it was blocking the trail. And so we were doing trail work to allow people to use the trail. We cut through that log, and it's just an example of how much water can be stored in down wood and down trees in the forest. It was like turning on a spigot, and I thought it would maybe last 10, 15 seconds. And I wish I would have timed it because it lasted many minutes. And it was like a full blast spigot. This log was huge and it was really long. So it just had gallons and gallons of water stored in it. And this is like July or August. So it was already the dry time of the year, but it's just an example of how much water gets stored in the woody biomass in the forest. And the industrial forest model is to clear all that out. And so they're minimizing water that gets stored in the landscape, and their whole system encourages runoff into streams and then going out to the ocean. So it's the opposite of what we really, I think, need is a term called slow water, where water gets slowed way down and doesn't just rush off to the ocean and we lose it. It actually stays in the landscape and raises the water table and that kind of thing.
It's interesting, David. I've never heard that term before, but it sounds very much like a typical permaculture principle of trying to keep water on the land longer before it flows off.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if you didn't log, if they were standing trees, it would even be better.
I have a question about, switching gears. I don't know if that's okay, but I was wondering when it's time to start collecting signatures, like how many people are signed up to, get started right away, or where is that whole thing at? How do we get people to sign up? Is there going to be an information packet of, the frequently asked questions and all that kind of thing?
All those things are needed. And in fact, we kind of had that operation, 3 years ago, but we have to sort of resurrect it. And we've been going through, getting all the materials back in order and ready, the brochures and all that stuff. And with what we thought we were doing today, which was doing the statement of organization and getting the signature sheets approved, we were sort of gearing up to have all of that stuff in order for us to, put the signature collecting back in place. But we don't have it ready right now. We do need to start signing people up and figuring out who's going to do it and maybe doing some training, but we kind of wanted to have the actual petition ready to go. And now we will have to have a different ballot title probably. So it's kind of a hurdle, but we also need to start doing what you're saying, which is getting ourselves organized around the mechanics of signature collecting.
Well, there's
It's actually very synchronistic, Bernadette, that you would bring that up, because at our meeting today, our steering committee meeting, we decided that next Monday, we will spend the entire meeting doing just that, just organizing ourselves, giving ourselves lead people to put these things forward, who's going to do materials, who's going to be, there are so many layers to it. We have done it. So, we will do it again, but we're rusty. So next Monday, we're going to be dusting ourselves off.
there are so many more young people in the climate movement now that it seems like that's a source that needs to be really tapped heavily.
Yep.
And all of you will be playing roles. We know that. So, if you can hook us into those places, it's going to take all of us multitasking. And then all of the people that we multitask to get will be multitasking, because, as we know, this kind of work doesn't usually come with a lot of financial support from the big players. So it's hard work, hard, honorable, important work.
I'll just put a note in that we're gearing up. Part of our time with the steering committee has been gearing up for the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference at the beginning of March, and preparing materials to present there. We have a panel lined up, and but we were also planning on signature gathering. Of course, a time frame we don't know now, but you're exactly right on. We do need to organize those things too.
Yeah, the PILC conference would be a great time to sort of we would have launched it as soon as we had signature sheets ready to go, but that would be a really great public launch where you get a lot of people excited, but you want to be ready and have your materials and have your initiative ready to circulate. And so hopefully they will, if the ballot title goes quickly, then maybe we could be ready by the conference.
We're just about, 12 minutes over time. Are there other questions, other sharings before we sign out? Well, we will be back on February, I believe it's the 20th. That's the third. Is that correct? The third Monday?
It's usually Dead Presidents Weekend, isn't it?
That's exactly right. It is yes. And we will be paying attention to the Sayus Law, where Aaron and I both live. So please join us next month for this. Bring some friends. Let's start creating more buzz around this really cool thing that we're doing with the initiative. And yeah, let's have double the squares on the screen next month.
I have one little question about I got an email and it led me to the base camp too, and I didn't want to sign in with Google, and I was able to get to the part where I click on the icon for the document itself, and it's a Google Doc, and I don't have a Google account and I don't really want one, but I would like to read it. Get any advice for me?
Yeah, it's on the website.
Okay. I will get more busy.
Yeah, just go to protect Lane County watersheds. You Google that and you'll go right to it, and there's a link to the watershed initiative.
Thank you.
Gwen, you had a question?
Yeah, I got here late, but maybe if I go to the website, I'll understand how the petition is going. I mean, I read that you had a fun announcement about.
We
No?
did have a fun announcement, but things are not as fun anymore. So, hey, Gwen, if you want, we can talk on the phone and I can get you squared.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. It was a great presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Rob.
Rob.
Very
All
good.
right, everybody. Big love. Take care.
All
Bye.
right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.